Hello and welcome to the Stormwater BMP Service and Maintenance webinar. I'm Pasquale Napolitano. I'm a Stormwater Maintenance Specialist with Hydro International. Given the number of attendees, this webinar is muted, but I put my contact information up here for you. I'll also email you afterwards so you can see the presentation and I can answer any questions you may have. We could schedule a follow-up call. I will also put my contact info at the end of the presentation. So welcome. In talking about service and maintenance of stormwater BMPs, those who will most benefit from this presentation are primarily engineers, both civil and municipal, contractors, and regulators. This presentation is approximately 45 minutes long, and all attendees will receive a certification good for 0.75 personal development hours. As an overview of this presentation, we'll look at general maintenance challenges, key players and stakeholders in stormwater systems and their maintenance, and a brief look at what is involved in maintenance of some of the more common stormwater BMPs, and also some tips on how you can help and what you can do to work together with others to speed up awareness of stormwater BMPs. About Hydro International. Hydro International, we have been developing and engineering structural BMPs for over 30 years. One moment, technical difficulties. Okay, I understand you probably didn't see the first few slides. This is my contact info. I'll be providing it again at the end. If you have any questions, you can call or email me. And as mentioned, it's 0.75 PDH for attending. It's primarily aimed for engineers, but as well as contractors and regulators. This was the overview of what we'll be looking at: maintenance challenges, key players and stakeholders, what's involved exactly, and how we can work together. So, Hydro International. Hydro International has 30 plus years of developing and engineering structural BMPs. We have thousands of separators and filter installs across North America and the globe. In addition to this, we also offer maintenance and service. This is not exclusive to our own systems. We treat any stormwater BMP. And we also have a world-class hydraulics lab. It's one of the largest manufacturing laboratories in the country. Now, due to our position in the industry, we interact in one facet or another with engineers, contractors, regulators, and the end users. The hope is to share some of the things that we see as a team daily and what we hear from these different groups, and to be able to share that. Many, if not all of you, are experts in the regulations and level of enforcement happening in your own respective areas, but it's insightful to see the often stark differences in both permitting and post-construction enforcement. This can be radically different even within the same state. So to start, as our starting point, we'll look at the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, or SWIP. These are the guidelines put forth by the EPA, indicate that BMP maintenance is required. This is to be seen specifically in Chapter 6. Now, this is often delegated by the EPA to the state or to the city or county level. And yes, we're all familiar with some of the leading programs or states that many others follow. But what I'd like you to do is to try to take a step back from what you know and what you do on a daily basis. If it helps, look at this map and consider all of these different communities and how the communication and interpretation of stormwater BMPs and how those are implemented, how that can be confusing from area to area. So to further illustrate the point, take a look at the following 6 examples from the EPA Summary of State Stormwater Standards. The examples on the left are not the same level of detail to those on the right. This is just an example from the state-to-state level. Now again, try to take a step out from your day-to-day and imagine how, as an owner, you'd be searching for answers about stormwater, and this could be confusing as to what your actual responsibilities are in terms of maintaining your BMP. Now, much of the regulatory effort is done on the front end to verify system performance. It's done for prior to installation. A lot of focus is put on the site before and during construction. As a result, the audience, which is in this case would be the contractor, is not necessarily the end user. The result from that is that enforcement of post-construction BMP maintenance is in many cases reduced to a simple encouragement. And this is also communicated or not communicated to parties who really don't hear that message or don't really understand it. That said, stormwater BMP maintenance is not happening regularly across the board. A little bit of some maintenance statistics or what we have noticed. Between 6 months and 2 years, almost any stormwater treatment system that is not maintained will cease to provide any effective treatment level. Now in our business, we found that fewer than 5% of end users actually maintain their systems, with some numbers as low as 2%. Now when the maintenance is occurring, we find that that 2 to 5%, the majority of these are coming from the owners when something goes wrong, as you can imagine. Your parking lot floods and all of a sudden stormwater treatment and maintenance goes to the top of your priority list. The second largest reason for why we hear from owners and they're looking to maintain their systems is that they receive a violation, notice of violation or NOV. So the challenge here, at this point the challenge itself is self-evident, probably already was before you signed up for the presentation. The issue is that stormwater systems are not being maintained in many cases. But let's take a closer look as to the why. So I've already encouraged you to take take a step rather away from what you know and do daily. But let's take a simplified look at all the different groups and players on the stormwater board. Try to imagine what their goals and objectives are, and if they align naturally with stormwater maintenance or even the awareness. You have engineers and then contractors, developers, in some cases property managers. Regulators enter here with the end user. These end users can be homeowners, it can be business owners of various sizes, small businesses, large multinational businesses. And you have to imagine that a homeowner's perspective and knowledge of stormwater is inherently much different from the head of, say, a public works department for a decent-sized city or municipality. So when looking at just the design, specification, and construction of a new site, there are, of course, a lot of people involved. Now, just in terms of the construction or reconstruction of a site, the stormwater can be considered something very small in scale compared to all the other aspects of what's being done. This, of course, doesn't help with the issue of communication and miscommunication about who's responsible and what's actually there once things are finished. So then let's fast forward to the completion of a site, take a look at the perspective of the end user or the responsible party who has the stormwater BMP or stormwater facility, and it's their responsibility to maintain that. So these end users are from all different walks of life, from all sizes. The goal here is to look at a few examples from different areas, chosen residential setting, as well as small, medium, and large commercial settings. For this presentation, we won't deal with industrial permit sites. Typically, these owners are actively engaged from the beginning, so we won't be looking at that. Additionally, we won't be looking at institutional or municipally owned sites. Again, these types of communities or organizations do have folks in place in regards to the overall operation and maintenance of everything, not just stormwater, but very often specific stormwater teams as well. So that said, we will look at individuals, homeowners, an individual homeowner or homeowners association, small businesses, regional retail chains, as well as big box chains and multinational retailers. So taking the story from residential setting, these stories are sort of fictional depictions, but they're based very much on reality and things that we hear very often. But as a simple story, let's take John. John is a proud homeowner, one of the new houses in Apple Grove community. Apple Grove is located next to one of the best schools in the district. Many young families have purchased the lots, and in fact, before completion, all of the lots are actually purchased by new homeowners. It's a very attractive area, not too dissimilar to the growing towns or suburbs and many of the areas close to many of you. Now, the development is just finishing the third and final phase. However, the LID or low impact development and proprietary or manufactured BMPs were installed in that first phase as part of the utility construction. Now, these are several years past due on maintenance. Now, the developer and the real estate company consider, say, the proprietary filters or sand filters, separators, whatever it may be. They think they're working fine. Everything still looks new. There's a consensus that why would we open a manhole lid? There's no flooding. There's no strange odors coming from any of the manholes. So they let it be. However, once the development is completed, the area is obviously handed over to the HOA. The homeowners association is now responsible for their neighborhood. And after some time, John and the other homeowners receive a card from the town informing them that they're responsible for the stormwater maintenance in the development in the neighborhood. Homeowners are, of course, caught off guard with no idea to what stormwater management is or what a BMP is. They search around and ask. Eventually, they'll come across some paperwork that gives them a better idea of who's responsible, what's in the ground. Once they understand that they're responsible, they still don't have a budget in place to maintain these systems. So after contesting over who is truly responsible over stormwater maintenance, they'll go back to the developer and see if they're responsible. What will eventually happen, though, is that a service will be contracted and conducted. Now, the cost of doing this is greater since several years has gone by, and there hasn't been any good housekeeping practices employed in the meantime, aside from your typical lawn care, mulching, mowing. Now, as a result, the maintenance does happen, but it happens as a one-time event. This is kicking the can down the road until another costly maintenance event is enforced or a major storm event causes substantial issues due to the lack of good housekeeping and maintenance. Now, that's not to say that there aren't examples of diligent property owners and property management companies who are aware of their stormwater regulations and have budgeted and prepared for inspections and operational services. However, these examples obviously most common with property management firms as it's part of their business, these types of operational costs, and therefore have a budget in place to handle this. This is, however, not the majority in the residential setting. So let's jump now to a small business setting. Let's take a look at Sam. Sam owns a local bagel shop. All of his money is invested in the shop, and his annual expense budget is already figured out. One day, Sam receives a notice of a violation, an NOV. At this point, the story starts to go the same way. And like the homeowners, Sam has a lot of questions. Now, let's say Sam has a gray or manufactured system. His questions are namely, I have a what? You'd have to imagine that a hydrodynamic separator is not something, not part of the vocabulary of a bagel baker. Now, after he asks, what do I have exactly? He probably asks, why didn't I know about this? He then probably asks, what is stormwater treatment? And what is a stormwater treatment system? And why does it have to be maintained? And why is it not self-maintained? What does maintenance even mean? And finally, how much is it going to cost me? Now, let's say Sam has a green or low impact system on site. Benefit is that this isn't underground and therefore not out of sight, out of mind, so to speak. But his questions aren't too much different. I have a what? But we mulch and we mow around the signs out front. There's no pond out back, it's just trees. This is something we hear quite a bit. Folks don't know they actually do have a pond on site, had a pond for years. You can show them the plans and they'll still contest that they don't have one, because these ponds aren't, of course, maintained. In addition to that, Sam may ask, stormwater treatment, what kind of treatment? This is nature. And something similar to maintaining a ditch, what does that even mean? And of course, how much is this going to cost me? Now Sam, similar to the HOA, will go and argue with the firm who he rents from about who exactly is responsible for the stormwater systems. Now, not having a budget for this kind of operating expense, maintenance will get done, but it will be a one-time event unless, of course, or until, of course, the local regulating bodies circle back around and tell Sam it's time. So let's take another step here and let's try to put ourselves in the shoes in a scenario of a small or medium-sized, a medium-sized business. And you can probably think of a few examples in your local areas, some companies that came out of the recession, came out strong, helped the local area get back on its feet, created a lot of jobs. We've seen pretty often that this ends up being C-stores, convenience stores, gas stations, things of that nature. So let's take one that's expanded across a good portion of the state, has started expanding into other states, and is doing relatively well. As a part of that, multiple locations are being built all at the same time. This growth is due in large success because there's a partnership between the design, the construction process, streamlining what's going into these sites, and it's helping to allow growth and expansion. So the first series of construction locations now are going about 1, 2, 3 years with occupancy. And as part of that, they're gas stations. Very often they may have a proprietary filter system. These filters are no longer effectively treating runoff as it's been several years. And what was designed as a small retention pond out back is a series of overgrown shrubs and bushes. Now, there may not have been any notices or notifications from the local body, but the regional construction distributor, who was part of that streamlined building process, reaches out to the construction manager and offers to supply the proprietary filter replacements or anything else that may need to be purchased to maintain the systems on site. Now, you can probably guess the response or the lack of a response at first. The construction manager is simply not interested in replacing or servicing stormwater systems. That's quite frankly not his goal. His goal is to get these stores built and keep costs down. The only potential unbudgeted expense he's concerned with is the potential for an oil spill that needs to be cleaned up. Not even in his line of sight is rainwater. Now, again, this is not to discredit the responsible business chains out there that plan, maintain for the stormwater and then the stormwater maintenance. For some of these companies out there, they've received an NOV or two. With that violation, they said, okay, enough's enough, and they've overhauled their system and their budget, and they treat their stores and they maintain their stores. For others, maybe they are trying to promote increased sales through their green initiatives. Stormwater falls in line with that, and they're being proactive. So my point is that it's not to say that there are not companies out there that are maintaining, but again, the point is that there are not very many of them that are. And for our last example, from a commercial setting, let's take a large box store, large retailer. Typically, these retailers will be fined. They'll receive notices of violations. They're seen as having the funds to comply, even if they haven't budgeted for it. So they end up receiving violations. Now, when in response to a violation, this large retailer will bid out maintenance on all of their stores nationwide. And after a year or so of maintenance, not connected in any way, it's completely unrelated, but perhaps there's some consecutive quarters of down sales. So the result of that is that the stormwater contracts are either done away with completely, or they're downgraded to aesthetics, to mulching and landscaping the front of the stores, anything to save costs, and so therefore this has become secondary. Now, the maintenance contractors in response will try to maintain their contracts. It's probably a sizable amount of the work they do. They'll try to keep on maintaining these systems, but they won't get any cooperation from the corporate office or from the individual stores or regional managers. And this will continue and until this large retailer receives another violation at some point in the future. Now, the difference with that is they're okay with the violation. They're okay with paying the fine and doing just enough to get by. That's because continuous stormwater service on all their sites may be more expensive considering their footprint than paying a few fines as they come up or maintaining a store here or there. Now, as a side note, it may be easy to point the finger at large retailers, and that's really not the intent. In fact, if you were to look for a site that's probably not in compliance, they may not look like it at first view. The parking lots are always well paved, have seal coats, freshly lined, look very clean, especially considering the size. But what you may not notice unless you really sort of look at what's there is that there is a large amount of trash usually in these larger parking lots, these larger stores. Catch basins will collect no short number of cups and wrappers. But in addition to that, if you talk to any maintenance companies who've ever worked on these types of locations, they'll be the first to tell you that the basins and the separators and the units installed on these sites are some of the dirtiest they see. And there's a few reasons for that. One of the ones that most folks don't think about, but most interesting, is that the illicit discharges that come from campers. If you've ever driven past any of these big retailers, especially in between state parks or in rural areas, campers tend to park there overnight, and stormwater catch basins tend to get used as individual or personal septic tank disposals. So there are things that go on that are sort of completely out of the realm of many folks who are specifying or putting together these systems, but there are things that nonetheless are happening. So the question now is, it's getting better, right? Well, the answer is yes. This isn't all supposed to be doom and gloom. It is getting better. However, these things don't happen overnight. Awareness is growing and it needs to grow. We, as a company, are seeing an increased approach from owners, asking us about their obligations and what they need to do to clean their systems. I will admit this is a very small percentage, and that those of them who do come to us have almost no frame of reference of what they actually have. They've seen the manufacturer's name on the manhole lid, and they know nothing more. They don't have a SWIP. They don't know what they're responsible for. They do know that they have to do something, but they don't know much more. But this is something we can all build off of. Now, to get started, to try to build off that, we need to recognize that regulations do not equal enforcement. Within a state, the regulations may be very progressive in terms of stormwater quality and what's expected, but the enforcement of that is another issue completely. This may not be something new to many of you, but we find that the further away you get from a large metro area and a large municipal infrastructure, the less impact enforcement tends to have. Many of you can probably identify that in your own respective states, where in some of the city areas, there are some very progressive systems in place and maintenance is being done, but you only have to drive 20 minutes outside of town and no one's ever heard of what a BMP is, even though all of their properties have them. Now, the other thing here is to recognize the difference between forced compliance and voluntary compliance. Now, does maintenance cost money? Yes, it does. But spreading awareness of this across the various responsible parties helps to manage expectations. People won't be blindsided by this. Most folks do want to do the right thing. They do want to maintain their systems. They just need to know about it. Just think of the last time, the look on the last person's face who you explained stormwater treatment to. You can almost envision the moment when the light bulb goes off for them, where they connect all the dots about how serious and how interconnected everything is with the storm drain. So think about that and think that inherently people do want to do the right thing. So what most of you are probably pretty curious about from this session is how does it work exactly? The how on maintenance. That actually depends on what it is. There's no shortage of different types of treatments for stormwater. And so depending on what that is will depend on the how and the what. So what's involved, again, depending on what it is, it could be anything from simple house cleaning, housekeeping practices, mowing, de-weeding of areas. It could be heavy machinery. So to break it down a little bit more, let's look at three primary parts here. The inspection, and then the tools or equipment, and then disposal and the other things that go along with a maintenance service. So these will be the three things. So we'll start with an inspection. The inspection is key. Now, most plans will say that a site should be inspected within the first year at varying intervals, anything from every 2 weeks to every 6 months to once a week, depending on what the system is, what the regulations are, what the engineer has suggested and recommended. What we find is that when owners do contact a manufacturer or a service provider and ask about what they need to do, it's usually well beyond that 6-month window that most manufacturers or most regulators suggest you should at least have your first substantial inspection. Now, the inspection itself is key in determining a few things. First, the current condition of the BMP facilities, which should help to estimate the maintenance frequency. By measuring the sumps, inspecting inlets and outlets for blockage, you can get an idea of how often this should be done and what to expect when having to do a maintenance service. Now, it will also help to determine the estimated amounts of waste disposal, and in some instances, this would also help to determine what types of waste are there and what authorized facilities these need to be disposed at. This primarily applies to multi-sector general permits. These will often need to have a profile done on the liquids and the solids to find out what is hazardous, and if so, with what metal or whatever else may be in there, to know where it can be deposited at properly at the right authorized facility. Again, that's usually an industrial setting, but that can happen in other settings, so it's something to be mindful of. So let's talk a little bit about the tools. There's a wide array of tools and equipment. The one thing I would like to point out that's pretty important is that it's important to remember that good housekeeping practices, again, this is the less expensive option. by doing maintenance consistently, you save yourself from having to do less intrusive work that has to be done from serious neglect. And we'll look at that in a moment when we look at specific types of BMP maintenance. But if it helps, think of it as getting teeth cleanings every 6 months as opposed to getting a root canal after a couple of years of not maintaining your teeth. So less expensive and less painful for stormwater in the same way. But tools can be, again, what you would consider landscaping or professional grade landscaping equipment. We're talking about ride-on lawnmowers, weed whackers, things of that nature. But then we're also talking about vacuum trucks, the ability to water jet. If maintenance hasn't been performed regularly, you're talking about excavators and flailing machinery, even cranes to pull things out of the ground. And in many cases for filtration units, you're talking about having to get into a unit, and that of course involves confined space entry, tripods, blowers, and sniffers, and everything entailed with safely entering a confined space. So what exactly is involved in maintenance? Let's take our first example of a dry pond. We're only going to take a few examples here of some of the more common types of BMP maintenance, but I encourage you, if you have questions on specific types of systems that you specify or that you see in your areas, to reach out, and we can talk about those as well. So as a dry pond example, mowing and clearing brush, you want to make sure there's no blockage to the drains. Much of this work can be done, again, while landscaping activities are being conducted. Commercial clients will tend to do this anyways, provided the pond is visible to the public. You will see quite a bit of ponds that are tucked away behind the loading bays or into the backs of stores. Again, out of sight, out of mind. They do not get the same type of treatment. Now, another key point here is to point out that basins and separators and other units and other gray structures typically will feed into these ponds. So these need to be cleaned out routinely as well. Everything's interconnected here. So the lack of maintenance on the catch basins leading to the pond will just shorten the time in between more substantial maintenance that needs to be done on the pond. Also like to point out that the good housekeeping practices that can be done at the same time as typical landscaping jobs and other aspects of a property, these are things that can be done within a day's work very often, depending on the scope or size of a pond. But that when a pond is neglected and needs more substantial work, you're talking about days or weeks of work. So again, taking the idea of what needs to be done, what type of price can go along with that to the client, what types of expectations and what they have going on, if it's an area that will then interrupt business, these things all should come into factor as to why they should be done more regularly. Let's take another example, hydrodynamic separators. Now, if these are maintained regularly, this is limited to Vector cleanouts, disposal of the pollutants and sediments. We recommend in many areas to try to do this in the spring. If it's an area that salts and sands on roads for the winter, you can try to Vector that up. If as well in areas where you'll have a lot of leaves falling in the autumn season, you do want to try to get those out of the basins before winter sets in too. So you can do this seasonally. Now, also like to point out that the same type of work that can be done on hydrodynamic separators can also be done at the same time you're doing your catch basins. So, you know, it's important to try to clean all your systems at the same time, make sure everything's done at once. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a client to have, you know, one system or part of a system cleaned and have someone come back and do another part later, unless an inspection report shows that it should be in that sort of cycle. Now, what happens with hydrodynamic separators or units that are in the ground, gray systems or proprietary systems that have been neglected for years? Now, what ends up happening is that they can become very damaged to the extent that sometimes, depending on what the unit is and where it is and the types of load it bears, it can have the need to be excavated out. And again, depending on where this is placed, can interrupt business. It's obviously much more substantial work that needs to be done if you need to pull a unit out of the ground as opposed to vectoring out the sump. Another example I would like to briefly highlight the maintenance practices on are both manufactured filters or proprietary filters and non-proprietary or your sort of standard sand filters. Now, if maintained regularly, there's a few things that need to be done: jetting, factoring, removing and disposing of the pollutants. This can be the top layers of sand. If these are proprietary units, it can be the cartridges or packs that are part of those systems. Now, very often, whether proprietary or non-proprietary, this will involve confined space entry. Folks will need to get into the hole, so to speak, and clean these out. So owners, the more they know about this, these property owners in the end understand that there is something that goes into this. This isn't just somebody showing up with a truck and doing work. You need to have support. You need to have tripods. You need to have extra laborers there to monitor. That expectation and painting that picture early is very helpful so people understand exactly what that is. They don't understand these systems. They don't see them the same way we do on a daily basis, and so they don't understand. It's under the ground and it's not something they think of. And all the same, if these systems are not treated properly, it can lead to issues with flooding, primarily depending on the type of system it is, and there can be some extent of excavating or essentially rebuilding of the system. So that would maybe lead you to ask for what should I look for in a service provider? We would recommend someone who understands stormwater systems. A Vector truck does not make you a stormwater maintenance company. You would want somebody with the ability to do or maintain everything on site, or at the very least to understand everything on site. Stormwater systems, as you know, are interconnected, so the maintenance of them should be done by a single source where possible. Or at the very least, if you have multiple companies doing different things, again, some green systems can be done by experienced landscaping companies with an environmental focus. They should be on the same page with companies that will do the Vector work of catch basins and things on site, having them work together and knowing that these systems are interconnected. Now, you will also see that, as I mentioned, Vector Truck does not make you a stormwater maintenance company. There are plenty of waste disposal companies, earth contractors, industrial plumbing, oil grease companies that have Vector trucks, and depending on the market, they will try to supplement their work by treating stormwater systems, which is perfectly fine, provided you are aware and you're comfortable with their level of expertise in that field. We do very often get calls in from clients who have used, so to speak, budget or companies from different industries and that have not been happy afterwards, mainly because their inspection reports or things they need to produce afterwards for local bodies is not up to par for what is expected. So if you are going to recommend someone, just be confident in their abilities. I like to take the other side of that as well, and would like to mention that even if you don't have a Vector truck, that doesn't mean you're not a stormwater company. There are plenty of landscaping firms that specialize in maintaining swales and ponds and green and LID systems. So they are out there. If you want to employ or work with them, of course, also try to work with someone who they work with or are comfortable with in terms of vectoring and gray systems and some of the other work that can't be done with that typical equipment. But again, ideally, you can find a company that can do all of that. So where's your role in this? How can you help, or at the very least, what can you keep in mind in terms of water quality? Try to think about how many stormwater systems you specify or you put in the ground every year. And try to keep in mind that these stormwater systems will stay in the ground for maybe 30 years or indefinitely. And then also remember that 2 to 5% of the systems are probably maintained. So your choice, it does matter every time you talk to someone, whether it's someone you are directly responsible for your specific client, whether it's them or whether it's anyone, what you're able to share and the decisions you make do have an impact. So things that you can do specifically, of course, whenever possible, try to get the end user's contact information. Send them the operations manuals if you've specified a proprietary piece of equipment. If not, if it is a non-manufacturer, non-proprietary system, such as say a pond, send them links to the local maintenance manuals or specifications from the local state or body that you use, so they have an understanding of that. Educate the contractor on the legal obligations that he has to his clients about the system. Again, contractors want to get their CO, they want to have their job done right and get off site, and that's their business, and that's to be expected. But everyone needs to be on the same page that although that is what they're paid to do, there is another aspect here at play, and these systems need to be maintained after the fact, and that needs to get passed on, since you may not be in direct contact with the prime contractor or general contractor, or therefore then the owner. As well, it's worth noting, and again, this may not be any news to anyone, but many local regulators don't know what they have exactly in terms of BMP. They don't know what exactly is in the ground in their area. They have an idea of maybe ones that have been in for 5, 10 years, things before that, maybe not. So ask them if they want the information you have about what you've specified and what's being installed. A lot of these organizations that are trying to do this can use the help. Everyone working together can help to build the picture of what's out there. There are no shortage of great GSI databases and websites in various areas that are doing this already. No coincidence in some of the areas that are in front of regulations and in front of stormwater treatment, but it can always be better, so keep that in mind. Something else you can do is work with those who are already in the industry. As I mentioned, Vector trucks are something that get associated with stormwater treatment because they pump out catch basins and separators and the like. Vector trucks are not exclusive to the stormwater industry, and in fact, if you didn't know any better and you were someone responsible for a unit and you try to go on an internet search and find someone with Vector truck capability, there's no set term to use. It can be an environmental company, but that could be a waste company. It could be stormwater, but that maybe is not somebody with the Vector truck. It could be a plumbing company. So there's really a lot of variance here in the wording that gets used and the capabilities of companies. Any good company as well will promote that they can do multiple things, even if it's not their specialty. So reach out to those in your area, get to know them, get to know their capabilities, what they're comfortable doing, what types of units they've maintained in the past. So proactively reach out to those in your area. Be ready to make a recommendation for a third-party inspector and or maintenance provider. Ideally, the more you communicate with the different players in the construction of a site and the installation of a BMP, the more this will be asked, and be ready to suggest someone. Now, if you are specifying a proprietary or manufactured BMP, you should always ask the manufacturer about their service team and what they offer. The manufacturer should be able to directly help you maintain your system. And not just that, any proprietary systems on site or LID or green systems as well, they should be able to help you with that. So don't be afraid to reach back out to the manufacturer and ask how they can help or what information they can give you about maintaining the system once it's in, and how to implement that at the time when these are being specified or being put in the ground. So an ounce of prevention, not that many of you aren't already out there doing this, but just stop and pause. Remember to go out of your way to reach out to not just the community, but also think about your client and how to best service your client by actively engaging them and imparting on them the importance of stormwater maintenance, and that there's costs associated with that, and that if you are looking out for your client, of course, then the idea that the longer it goes by without maintenance, the more environmental and financial harm to the community and to them. So just try to pause from time to time and think of that and try to give more information. More information is always better than less. Because of all the parties involved in both approving, manufacturing, installing, and maintaining stormwater systems, every one of these groups has their own priorities, their own responsibilities. their own people they report to or are servicing or supplying. So with that, you get a greater gap between the operational maintenance, which of course leads to the greater cost of maintenance. That's because there's so many people at play here and so many people have different things to focus on. So again, anything you can do to make connections and get everyone on the same page, it's a collaborative process, but it's something that can happen and we see happen. It's just, it can happen more. So in terms of if you are a specifying engineer, what you can try to keep in mind, again, this is where you're able to do this, but try to be mindful and try to do a few of these things. One of them is to keep in mind about unit placement. Now, obviously, units are placed where they need to be placed, but units placed in the middle of a busy road, it's a safety concern. Even contractors who do maintenance, contracted to do stormwater maintenance, it's a safety issue for them. So it hinders their ability to inspect and maintain. But if you have a site where the owner is capable and would like to at least do the inspections themselves, having it in a busy road area obviously hinders them from doing so. Keep in mind as well, if a site is there and that's where it has to be, of course that's fine, but keep in mind as well then whenever that needs to be maintained, there needs to be permits in place to close off roads and things like that as well. So that can change cost. Now we also, where you can, of course, try to make that show that the units are accessible. Inaccessible units create a challenge in maintaining, of course. A few examples that we see out in the field and sometimes on plans are units that are sometimes inside parking structures. Again, maybe these need to be here. It does create issues with Vector trucks accessing those, as well as units that are put into green spaces with no access roads nearby. If they're on the back end of a pond, how does the truck get over there? Things like this have to be taken into account. And again, if I can try to bring the point home, more detail is better than less. One of the most common sources of confusion we find, at least with dry ponds, is cattails. Some people are told they are supposed to have cattails. Some people are told they're not supposed to have cattails. Nobody seems to know what's going on. That's just one example, but if you can imagine the type of uproar and back and forth between owners and cattails, and if they are a cancer treatment center or a retailer, cattails really shouldn't be on their mind, but it ends up being a big point of contention. So whatever you can do to make clear that cattails are not supposed to be there, or whatever the unit may be. So trying to specify with maintenance in mind, again, we do find that the end user who does reach out to a maintenance company or to a manufacturer, they do not typically have their stormwater prevention, pollution prevention plan. They honestly don't know what a SWIP is in most cases. Again, sort of excluding here in industrial or clients who do know. Most folks don't know what that is. Now, they will more often than not have their construction plans. So although not always 100% accurate, it will show them more or less where the drainage is, how many basins and things like that. Now, what you can do to help is anything on the plans that can say that there's a unit here, this unit will need to be maintained. These things help. We see plans that state this, that state that units will need to be maintained. We see plans that make no mention. So whatever you can do, wherever you can communicate, take advantage of that and do so. Just as an example, this is something we've seen. This is just one of many examples. Now, if you can encourage or announce that there is a unit there and this unit is under the ground, but there's a sign up now that says what the permit is and that it needs to be maintained. Does that make it maintained? No, not necessarily, but it is a step in the right direction. So anything you can do. Other than that, I mean, what do you think? We need to work collaboratively on this. So how can these different parties at play between engineers and contractors and maintenance companies, manufacturers, how can everyone collectively make a difference? How can we further drive home the need for maintenance to occur more regularly, not when absolutely necessary and only in rare instances. And what have you found that works for you in your areas? Again, the hope here is to give some insight about the different players in different regions. But again, all of you do know what's going on in your own backyard and what's working for you and what isn't. There will be a survey at the end of this. So at that point, we would encourage you to give that sort of feedback. Then in terms of the next steps, there really isn't a single answer to increase maintenance awareness or maintenance occurrence. But again, a small amount of insight into what's going through the heads of the different people and their responsibilities and what their goals and targets are should help to open the doors to collaboration, if not at the very least, give you some insight in terms of how best to communicate and try to make this happen. Aside from the survey, I do encourage you to contact me and share whatever initiatives or practices do work for you or don't. Would like to hear more about that for a follow-up webinar, some more specifics. Again, we touched on some very basic and only a few examples of types of BMPs, and if many of you feel that there's other systems that you would rather hear more about or more in depth about, that's something that we could follow up with. So please let me know. And other than that, if you have questions about specific sites, if you need quotes for yourself for a client about how much maintenance might cost, it's all very much customized to a site, but that's the first step. Or if you have ideas or things that you want to share, I encourage you to please email me or call me. We'd love to talk to you, see what ideas you have or what issues you have that we can try to help out with. And as I mentioned, do the same in your local areas as well if you do work with people. But I can only speak for myself, and I would be happy to speak with you. And other than that, I want to thank you for your time here today. As mentioned, a survey will be coming out afterwards, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.